Grazie di essere qua oggi. Iniziamo la conferenza con Dagong Europe. Oggi è un incontro abbastanza affitto perché avremo tre temi. Abbiamo dunque una prima presentazione sul sistema bancario italiano, dove ovviamente i stress test che ci sono stati. Non mi dilago sui risultati, sono stati ampiamente comunicati e seguiti dalla stampa. E dunque ci sarà una valutazione da parte di Dagong Europe, una presentazione su investimenti cinesi in Europa. Ovviamente Dagong Europe ha una prospettiva diversa, visto che comunque è una società italo-cinese. Industry Compass, che è questa presentazione di vari settori. Ci sarà la presentazione di due settori nuovi, che sono quello del lusso e quello del beverage. Adesso passerò la parola a Ulrich Bierbaum, che è l'amministratore delegato di Dagong Europe.
Today, we invite you to look at Chinese investments in Europe again through our eyes, to understand the reasons that drive a Chinese corporate to take a stake in a target company in Europe and the sectors where they are most interested in investing. We can proudly say that our mission of connecting Chinese investors with European companies makes us part of the new Silk Road. Actually, we are the only rating agency in Europe to provide all of our analytical work, both in English and Chinese. Each of our publications receives constant attention from Chinese investors. We are seeing high double-digit growth rates of registrations on our free website. Registered users from China and Hong Kong, and among them institutional investors and private wealth family offices, meanwhile make up the largest part of users on our site. The opening of the Chinese capital account has many facets. One is trade. Meanwhile, there is a daily trade volume of over 1 billion between the EU and China. More recently, we are seeing now free trade zones. We are seeing several trade agreements that are under negotiation between China and various countries. The internationalization of the renminbi is facilitated by the recent establishment of several RMB clearing centers in European cities, and Chinese banks show an increased presence and lending activity in Europe.
Good morning. I'm Carola Saldias. I'm the head of the financial institutions team at Dagong Europe, and we would like to give a brief snapshot about the Italian banking system, trends and outlook for 2015. In terms of operational environment, we see that Europe has been divided in different levels of recovery. The Italian banking system has been affected by several shocks. However, we see as a positive factor that the banking system in Italy has not been affected by a real estate bubble or any structural reforms that needed to have an external intervention. What we see in the operational environment for the Italian banking system, it's mainly affected by the economic environment with a double-dip recession. That, of course, is affecting the lending growth, is affecting asset quality, and therefore the recovery for the system itself, it's less evident for the first half of 2015. Then when we move to credit risk complexity, what we see also is a different scenarios within the different European banking systems, with peripheral countries, as I mentioned before, having significant issues in terms of asset quality. And also we see other countries in a better stage of recovery. What we see specifically in the Italian banks, and that was also something highlighted through the comprehensive assessment, the comprehensive assessment defined harmonization of the definition, and in that context, Italian banks were significantly affected. That made Italian banks included in this exercise to show an above average level of non-performing loans with a level close to 20% compared to an average of the banks included in the sample around 13.3%. That, of course, it's also related to the factor of the Italian legal foreclosure procedures, that in Italy it takes more time, of course, to do a specific write-down or to liquidate non-performing assets. We will expect Italian banks to continue increasing their covered positions, of course, to give relief also to the investors that there is a recognition of asset quality issues, of course, allow them to improve the comparability with European larger banks. As another important factor that we consider in our criteria, and that's something, of course, that was the main focus of the comprehensive assessment, is related to capitalization. We saw overall that between January and September 2014, roughly 50 billion euros were raised by banks, considering only the sample of banks included in the comprehensive assessment. And within Italian banks, the capital raised was around 11 billion. Italian banks still show a below average level of capitalization. Banks in Italy will continue building up capital to provide more comfort to investors and also to the European banking system overall through the sale of distressed assets. In terms of liquidity, we have seen in European banks overall, it's an anticipation to Basel III liquidity frameworks. All banks in Europe have improved liquidity through the use of ECB facilities. The Italian banks has been historically the largest user of ECB facilities, the well-known LTRO or TLTRO, with an outstanding usage as of September of 160 billion euros. However, we expect that 2015 will be also a turning point for Italian banks to continue and to move to some other funding sources. Profitability in the European banking system, it's taking different stages based on the stage of their economy. The Italian banks are showing a slower growth because of the contraction in the demand and in the credit demand in Italy. However, we are cautious about the recognition of further loan loss provisions related to the delay of the economic recovery that is still being revised downward in the latest information published by the IMF and the European Commission. Italian banks are focusing to a more traditional banking business. They are less exposed to international activities as other larger peers in Europe.
I would like to focus our presentation on three main areas. We will update you very briefly on the updates that we did and on the expansion of the industry compasses. And then we will move towards to a more interesting and juicy topic of Chinese investments in Europe and how those benefit on both sides. At the end, we will focus a little bit more on Italy. We also published 4 analysis or more extensive researches. We published a research on alcoholic beverages, and together with that large spirit, wine and beer producers, we published a piece on European utility networks. We also published a piece on pharma industry because of the developments in China in terms of insurance, health coverage, and what the potential strategies for large global and also European pharma companies could or potentially should apply in China, and how the whole Chinese market could develop, because of course it is going to become one of the largest pharma markets in the world. And putting more detail on what's in the free trade zones in China for European players, what they can utilize out of that or expect out of that. On the top chart, you see the annual investments that Chinese corporations or investors have done outside of China. And you can see that from 2004, it became from $5 billion came up to over $100 billion in the last year. That's a significant growth. We need to see how it compares to other areas in the world. China grew from number 33 decade ago up to the 3rd largest foreign investor. If we add also Hong Kong has approximately another $100 billion of foreign investments. Chinese foreign investments, we have seen they have grown quite rapidly, on average 35% over the past decade. That's astonishing growth. Last year it was 23%, so we see probably the trend a little bit slowing down, but that's a general trend in China. China is at 2013 with $660 billion of the stock of the investments outside of China. Within the next decade, the stock of the investments would triple. Europe is a little bit more open. Europe now sees more value in those mutual investments, because the Chinese could bring 2 main areas. One, China has a lot of capital, so the European companies can benefit from getting a strong capital partner. Second, China is becoming number 1, 2, or 3 markets in many areas in the world. We can see some tendencies here. We can see the technology area focused on automotive, the utilities, some infrastructure, and moving towards more lifestyle focused investments. And we see Ferretti, it goes hand in hand with technology as well, Club Med. Of course, it's a little bit, at the current time, a little bit controversial with the anti-extravaganza move in China. But I think in general, the economic and social trends in China will actually overshadow what is now happening, being a little bit of repositioning in terms of attention to corruption, attention to extravagant lifestyles. So it's a little bit of a correction. But we, in general, think it's not going to derail the main direction.
Buongiorno a tutti, la mia parte sarà in italiano e verterà sui 2 ultimi compass che abbiamo aggiunto alla nostra lista. Quello in alto in particolare rappresenta i tassi di crescita delle grandi aziende del lusso che tutti noi conosciamo. E come vedete rimangono i loro fatturati, sono rimasti negli ultimi 10 anni, con l'unica eccezione del 2009, ben sopra lo zero. Quindi nonostante una crisi che stava affliggendo l'Europa, i risultati delle aziende si sono dimostrati anticiclici. Come sappiamo, l'alta gamma tende a essere anticiclica. Il declino più grande di cui vogliamo parlare oggi, di cui abbiamo scritto nel nostro compass proprio perché c'è un forte angolo cinese, è questo declino che parte dal 2012 e che riguarda la politica anti-extravaganza, così chiamata, finalizzata a combattere la corruzione e introdotta dall'ultimo governo di Xi del novembre 2012. La politica cosa fa? Ha ridotto i prodotti di lusso, in particolare ha colpito i consumi in certi segmenti che si prestavano di più ai regali. Infatti è stata attaccata la politica dei regali culturalmente molto forte in Cina. Alcuni settori perciò sono stati più attaccati di altri, come per esempio il settore dei gioielli, la moda meno, magari l'accessorio di più, quindi ovviamente c'è un angolo che è stato più affetto. Le grandi aziende del lusso, che per definizione sono molto diversificate, sono state relativamente impattate, quindi overall il risultato rimane positivo per il mercato. Ci attendiamo quindi che questo trend, vedete, si sta stabilizzando verso la fine del periodo e ci attendiamo che continui così per un determinato periodo, nel senso che le aziende si stanno muovendo e prevediamo che quindi si ritorni a un recupero nel medio termine, perché le aziende, come poi anche quelle degli alcolici di cui parleremo, nel medio termine riescono ad adattarsi a quelli che sono le necessità del mercato. Questi sono risultati globali. È possibile che la Cina impatti così tanto? Sì, perché lo vedete, è in parte spiegato nel grafico sotto, che rappresenta lo split geografico sempre del fatturato di queste top 10 grandi aziende, grandi marchi del lusso europei. E come vedete l'Europa, primo consumatore fino a 10 anni fa del prodotto di lusso, ha lasciato il posto all'Asia. Chiamiamo alcoholic beverage la somma di 3 settori: gli spirits, quindi quelli ad alto tasso alcolico, i liquori per capirsi, le birre e i vini. L'Europa oggi, che ha dato in Italia tante aziende del beverage, è in declino, continua con all'incirca più di 500 billion di valorizzazione di mercato a rimanere il mercato numero 1. L'Italia rincorre perché se l'Europa 10 anni fa rappresentava la metà, il 50% del mercato, oggi è solo un terzo, perché è cresciuta a un tasso del 4% all'anno. Le società che producono liquori, i loro fatturati, come hanno performato negli ultimi 10 anni. Dal 2008 in più abbiamo incluso un paio di anni di stime. Sono delle grandi aziende che producono spirits in Asia e come vedete, dopo declini significativi di crescita, il trend è stato al ribasso. Il segmento spirits in particolare per l'Asia e per la Cina rappresenta un punto interrogativo. Vedremo come performerà, ci aspettiamo una flessione a causa dell'impatto della anti-extravaganza. Sempre per il mercato asiatico, il mercato cinese, il mercato delle birre è cresciuto a doppia cifra, espandendosi del 30% negli ultimi 8 anni.
Prima domanda, iniziamo con Son Jen.
Buongiorno. The first question is to Mr. Richard. As in your research, can you share with us in the cooperation from China and Europe, the investment in Europe, there are some risks and difficulties? This question for you. Then that's question for Mr. Rick. So we know for a new rating agency, it's not easy to develop in the European country, in the European zone. So respect the other main rating company, there are some different method or different focus for your company. Thank you.
I will start with the question about the risks. Of course, I prefer to talk about the opportunities, but that's probably everybody would like to see the positive side of the world first. Of course, the main risks are coming from the cultural differences and from lack of knowledge about the other side. We have seen, of course, some deals that run into, let's say, difficulties or delays. And I think it's important that that both sides get well known the culture and the legislative specifics that might influence whatever deal they're preparing. I think a very good example was the attempt of Chinese large construction company to build a highway in Poland, which actually as a good aim in the beginning ended up in let's say departure of both sides, mainly because of the legislation. I mean, I understand that it might be surprising for the Chinese that we here in Europe build bridges over the highway for frogs and other animals, but it's exactly part of the overall knowledge of the environment. So that's, I think, the major risks. I think the main opportunities are coming, as we said, in the area of capital arrival, in the area of common synergies in terms of markets and knowledge. But of course, all this has to come on the base of very good common knowledge on both sides. And I think it applies also vice versa with the European or Western companies going to China, and we could talk about myriads of examples. Would probably we could use the famous Peugeot example. If you look at first factories that were built, auto factories in China, among first three, I think, were Jeep and Peugeot. The third one was Volkswagen. If you look at the shares of automotive Western producers in China now, Peugeot and Jeep are nowhere. Volkswagen is running the whole show. So it's all about knowledge of the other side. Probably the French automaker didn't do as good job on preparing for the market as the Germans did. So those are the main, in our view, the main risks.
Yeah, if I may very briefly respond to the second part of your question in terms of do we have a different message? Essentially, I think, it's really time to have a credit voice coming from China, because as of now, there is not really a representation of such credit voice in China, and this is actually our main mission. It's really to give to Chinese investors credit information, rating reports that we also publish in Mandarin. So we take it very serious to be a point to go to for this very, very big market that is, as we have seen, already active in Europe. So there is a very big need that this credit research and rating reports will be taken in from Dagong Europe for those Chinese investors. In doing so, Chinese investors can rely on the fact that we are not a mass production machine. I think it's very beneficial for any investor to know that our teams taking a very, let's say, focused and view and spend enough time in the relationship with the issuer to then take all of the findings into a rating committee and publish the result. And in having a selective or exclusive club of issuers that are, our clients, we can almost guarantee that there is a very big visibility that we can create for them to become very visible for Chinese investors.
I'm Tise Knes-Pastoroli, Börsenzeitung Die Frankfurter. What makes South Europe in general and Italy especially so attractive for China's investments? Are these the low prices or is there anything else? And a second question is, why does China invest just 2% of Enel and Eni? So is it to grow in this investment or is it to sell it? Thank you.
I would say there are probably two main drivers. You, of course, mentioned one. The Southern Europe is in a position now, or has been since the crisis, that would suggest that the assets might be at a good price-value proposition. That's of course a reality. And the Chinese investors might be willing to take this opportunity to invest. I think what's more important, and it's specifically for Italy, that on top of this, Italy has a very solid technology content in those assets. I think in investments in Italy, the Chinese investors are not only looking for favorably priced assets, but also the assets that have a high technological content. Ansaldo Energia, bright example. And there are many others. Terna and Snam, those two companies belong to largest utility networks in Europe, with one of the, let's say, best developed regulatory regimes. And most stable performance. The second part of your question, you mentioned the 2% ownership on several Italian large industrial groups. I think those investments are more portfolio investments. And of course, if we look at it from a relative perspective, 2% ownership is not a significant ownership. If we look at it from absolute perspective, in terms of Enel and Eni, 2% in both probably value, that's my rough, now out of the top of my head, probably 2 to 3 billion euros. So that's not an insignificant investment. We're talking about Ansaldo Energia in terms of 500 million. So that needs to be put in perspective. It also comes with the strategy, and it's a general Chinese strategy, to start slow and with minority shares. There are minority stakes in many other Italian companies, Fiat, Telecom Italia, and some others. It's a little bit difficult to track those. Of course, we know about those because they reach the 2% level when the company has to report it. So we know about them. We think there are many others that are below this hurdle. and so they are not reported as those two prominent investments.
Grazie mille.